All right, so next talk.
Okay.
Some FAU. You want to go?
No, it's fine. It's Thomas Lee from Product Planet. And his talk is about providing free continuing education for physicians.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Thomas Lee. I'm here today speaking about a topic that affected me very personally. I began studying it a few years ago, and it's just in the past 8 or 9 months that I've been connected with researchers and physicians up in Massachusetts and helping them to create an educational program on a new topic for physicians that's very important. It started years ago, 5 years ago, with one of my older brothers. He began having this daily vomiting and nausea. And basically he would go, he went to the doctor. They first misdiagnosed him with food poisoning. Next it was gastroenteritis. Gave him some more pharmaceutical drugs. Then with other Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, cyclic vomiting syndrome, running him through countless tests. The medical bills were through the roof, $50,000, $60,000, and they couldn't still figure out what was wrong. And the other strange feature was that he was sitting in the hot shower getting relief from whenever the hot water was covering his body, so he would sit in the shower for 4 or 5 hours a day. Another doctor suggested he has obsessive compulsive disorder because of the showering, and that wasn't right either. He was getting relief from the shower, and so he would stay in it so long it would be 4 or 5 hours until he blows out the hot water heater and ends up in the ER where they want to run tests on him, and he demands to be in the shower. And that's a clinical feature that you notice a lot of people end up in the emergency rooms demanding a hot shower. And so the doctor, this is just a confused doctor to illustrate this point. So how did we figure it out? We took those two features and we went to Google and we typed in showering and vomiting. It was really that easy. And what pops up here is every result on the front page is this thing called Cannabinoid Hyperemesis syndrome, cyclic vomiting associated with compulsive bathing and chronic marijuana smoking. And we didn't think anything about the marijuana smoking because it's so associated with promoting nausea, promoting appetite and preventing nausea. There's even pharmaceutical drugs that are combined, are extracted from the plant or synthesized from it that are used for that same feature of preventing nausea and stimulating appetite. So we brought this information to the doctor, and the doctor still couldn't tell us what was actually wrong and explain the whole situation to us. So that to me outlined a larger problem we have with our medical system. If there's these people using this cannabis, marijuana, and the doctors can't guide them in the therapeutic fashion that would allow them to have the best quality of care. So these were my questions. Why are doctors so confused about marijuana? Are doctors taught about this in medical school, the exact mechanisms of action, how it's working within the body, rather than just it might make you feel better? And why specifically are states passing medical marijuana laws? We have one coming up for a vote in November. Florida would become either the 22nd or 23rd state to have this. So why exactly is this happening? It's not. Why is the federal government resistant to it? And what is this cannabinoid hyperemesis, seemingly paradoxical entity where people who are smoking so much marijuana end up vomiting? And it's very rare. It's not seen very often, but it does exist clinically. I was connected with the Answer page. They was established by a Dr. Stephen Korn from Harvard Medical School back in 1998, specifically just to provide continuing education to his residents. Ended up getting linked to from other universities. It's now used in 120 countries, has 20,000 registered users. They launched their medical marijuana program shortly after they passed their constitutional amendment in 2012. So they've had this in the works since January 2013, and it certifies doctors. There's a mandate where doctors have to obtain continuing medical education credits if they want to certify patients to use this medicine. And so it's very simple. It's just a crossword puzzle. You read a book chapter of content, you complete the crossword puzzle, you get the educational credit through the jointly sponsored with the oldest state medical society in the country, the Massachusetts Medical Society, that then provides them American Medical Association Physicians Recognition Award continuing medical education credits on medical marijuana. And so this is important. It's an unbiased perspective that's not motivated and it's not underwritten by manufacturers. If you're a drug company or a pharmaceutical company selling Viagra, you might push and create education on nitric oxide so your doctors can then prescribe more Viagra. So this is unbiased in the sense that it's not financially motivated or any political interest specifically, and it's an honest portrayal because we have people on both sides. We've got our Drug Enforcement Agency, our Food and Drug Administration, our federal government that refuses to acknowledge any medical benefit whatsoever of this, any compounds in it, and also exaggerates the dangers. But then you have people who are dying of cancer and AIDS, and their physicians who want to treat them, who only want to talk about the benefits. So we have two extremes here. We have to have an honest portrayal so doctors can really provide that best quality care that the patients deserve. And the modern research really just began 50 years ago with Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in his lab at Hebrew University in Israel. There were some previous attempts in the 1940s. There's a Roger Adams at the University of Chicago who was able to get the compound cannabidiol, or CBD, and patent the extraction process. That's the compound we've more recently heard about, helping the children with Dravet syndrome and the seizures, basically curing them, bringing them from 300 seizures a week to 1 or 2. But basically what we know today is 50 years ago, Raphael Mechoulam first isolated the THC and the other cannabinoids from hashish he got from the police station in Israel. And then moving forward here to 88, we didn't know how it was working in the body until 1988 when Dr. Alan Howlett discovered a structure on the surface of the cell membranes, a protein structure called a receptor, or a cannabinoid receptor, that is activated by cannabinoids. But you don't just have that in your body so you can smoke pot and it does something to you. You have it because you create your own natural cannabinoids that plug into this. And this is actually, I'm glad we have the red back here. The red and the yellow illustrates the most densely populated regions. So this is actually the most densely populated receptor system within your brain. But it's not just in your brain, it's also in your peripheral and your immune system. You see this whole body scan. These were done at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland in 2010. So you see doctors should learn about this. It's a very important body system. And so here we have the CB1 type 1 receptors are mainly in the brain, central nervous system. Cannabinoid CB2 receptors are mainly illustrated in your immune system cells. And so moving forward, and then in 92, Dr. Mechoulam steps back into the picture. He's still around. He's 83, 84 years old. He's still at his laboratory. But in 1992, he discovered the cannabis that your body makes, that your body's natural marijuana that plugs into those receptor systems. And that basically changed everything, and the research has only been astronomically multiplying from that point. So a quick review, your body makes cannabis, cannabinoids, like anandamide. They named it anandamide. Ananda is Sanskrit for supreme bliss. So it's a bliss molecule. And so they have anandamide, and then you have, as your natural cannabinoid, then you have the plant-derived THC or CBD, and then you have your synthetics, like your Marinol, which is just a synthetic THC that you get from the pharmacy. They all plug into the receptors like a key in a lock, cause a physiological reaction. And this goes back much farther than most people think. The evolutionary link that cannabinoid receptor has been identified in sea squirts, a 600-million-year-old organism, and it was then inherited by mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. This is an article illustrating that from the Journal of Neurochemistry in 2005. And so moving forward here, and then it's just kind of a work of nature that a flowering plant that's only been in existence the past 130, probably 40 to 130 million years ago, that a plant would create a compound that plugs into a receptor system that's already been in existence for hundreds of millions of years. And so moving forward, this is just illustrated 72. We got a little peek there. That's when it was around that time it was put in the Schedule 1 most restrictive status. Nixon's Schaefer Commission came up and said that it was more harmful to have it criminalized and ruin kids' lives. It should be taken off of the schedule. So Nixon, at that point, he removed all research priorities, stripped all funding, and you see it kind of tapers off until 1992 when Dr. Raphael Mechoulam made that discovery again. These are just published articles from the National Institutes of Health. and here we have 2014. It equals out to over 2 independent research bodies publishing papers every single day on this subject for the past 20 years. So we know more about this stuff than we do most of the pharmaceutical drugs on the market. Here's an excavated cave, 2,700 years old. They were able to take out the cannabis found in this man's tomb from 2,700 years ago and tested positive for cannabis, THC, all the cannabinoids. So this stuff has been used by humans for quite a long time, easily thousands of years. And this is from phytochemical and genetic analysis of cannabis from Central Asia from Article 2008. And it was brought here from the East by a Sir William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. This is an interesting guy. At the age of 23 in medical school, he discovered the cure for cholera. And then he was picked up by the British East India Company that was in India. And while he was there, he laid the telegraph in Asia, was knighted by Queen Victoria. He also noticed indigenous use of cannabis and brought it back here to the West, where it was then became a patent medicine for 100 years, and you have all these cannabis indica, infant's relief formula, and then they have the cannabis americana. They're going to grow it here now, and this was a very established medicine. And so there were, between that period when he brought it back in the 1800s to the early 1900s, the FDA was then created in 1938, and they didn't allow cannabis to be grandfathered in, where they let things like aspirin and morphine in through the approval process. They just totally shut it out and kicked her out onto the street. And the argument, it wasn't like a National Academy of Sciences came together and established this drug is bad, this drug is good, this drug is bad, illegal, legal. It was basically, and looking back at this, I just want to say that we've come a long way in the past 80, 90 years in terms of civil rights since Dr. Martin Luther King. The main argument was by a guy named Harry Anslinger, and he basically made the argument that when black people or people of color took marijuana into their body, it made them forget their proper place in society. And so this was the main argument, and also marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. This was the testimony to Congress. This was on the record, and it was very convincing back in 1930s America. It's sad, but that's how it was. And we have this Pulp Fiction, Reefer Madness, Marijuana Murder type publications, and it really had people fooled for quite a long time. The federal government still refuses to accept any medical benefit. They keep it as a restrictive Schedule 1, no accepted medical use, high potential for abuse. Probably the most arbitrary and capricious is the lack of accepted safety under medical supervision. There's no way a doctor could ever monitor you and make sure this is okay. It's completely ridiculous, and that's why the states are legalizing it one by one. Eventually it'll be the whole country. Florida might be next this year. We have many articles on this, 15,000 plus on the cannabinoids and 2,000 plus on your body's natural cannabinoids. And we have over 110 clinical studies, controlled, placebo-controlled, gold standard. And this is really, we know more about this drug than a lot of the drugs that pass through the FDA process and end up killing thousands of people every year. So it's ridiculous. In order to do research on it, you got to bounce back and forth, get permission from both these alphabet agencies, FDA, the DEA, and if you, after 10, 20 years, you might get permission. You got to go through NIDA and submit your research proposal. Your research proposal has to be studying a negative. It can't study a positive because they're the National Institute on Drug Abuse, not drug promotion or drug benefit. So they'll reject you if you try to study a positive aspect of it. And if you do get research, if you do get the approval, you got to get it from this guy at the University of Mississippi. This guy grows it, and he rolls it into cigarettes for you, and he grinds up the stems, the leaves, the buds all together. So you get this terrible product that's usually between 3 and 6% THC, whereas you go to Miami, you go to the dorm rooms all across America, you'll find 20, 25% THC. It's really ridiculous that they force people to use this product and do research on this, because you're not going to get good results with this research. And then moving forward, just for a more broad understanding, they developed a weight loss pill that blocks activation of the cannabinoid receptor, so nothing can get in there and cause that physiological reaction. It was marketed as a weight loss drug. Don't diet, just lose weight. Take this pill, you won't get hungry. No munchies, no natural hunger signals firing. And it was marketed by Sanofi Aventis, and it was eventually pulled from the market because, well, this is just an illustration. It was blocked block the munchies there. And so this is rimonabant's mechanism of action, but it was shut down when there were 4 suicides and 9 attempted suicides. There were also psychiatric disorders and many other problems with people taking this drug that blocked activation of the cannabinoid receptor, thus illustrating even further how important this system is in your body and why doctors need to know about it. Pharmaceutical companies wanted to keep going. Oh, suicides, just collateral damage. Let's keep going. We're going to make money off this diet pill. And so you got loss of appetite, hunger signals don't fire. In mice, you give it to mice as soon as they're born, and they don't have that suckling reflex. They don't get the milk from their mothers. And so it's blocking a really important physiological instinctual responses. And so this hyperemesis where I became first encountered this whole research body because it was my brother. The first research report was 19 patients in Australia. They've done a review in the Mayo Clinic. They reviewed patients. They have 98 patients they've identified. So it's very rare. Considering how many people use this stuff, it's very rare. And you see things like nausea, excessive thirst, and compulsive bathing in hot water. Basically, it begins usually with nausea or lack of appetite in the morning hours, and although it's very rare, it does pop up from time to time. But the funny thing is, it goes away. All you have to do is stop smoking for 2 weeks, and it goes away. And your body kind of resets itself. But these people will continue doing it because they say, oh, it's the only thing that makes me feel better. They've been using it for many years before the disorder ever developed. So this is the problem. That if the doctors would just tell them and be able to explain this in a completely like in a fashion that they could understand, then it would generally be gone in just 2 weeks. And you see it outlined in the literature. They call it paradoxical. They don't understand it. It's an enigma. And that's why, because doctors don't learn about the endogenous cannabinoid system in medical school. It's new stuff. It's 20, 25 years. You graduated 30 years ago. You never learned about this stuff. And so you have many doctors, they just don't know what's going on. And you often go misdiagnosed. Like my brother, he lost about 1/3 of his body weight 4 or 5 years before we were able to identify that this is the problem. And after that, there's so much misdirection and confusion on this, they might not even believe the doctor. They say, you go away, you've been lying to me. My government's been lying to me. Everyone's been lying to me my whole life. Why would I trust you? This stuff makes me feel better. So that's the psychology that's occurring in ththese people's minds, and they generally, even if they learn about this, they might just say, no, I don't believe you. And so we think, Dr. Meshulam, I've emailed with him, he thinks that it's an immune system response where you're using so much of the stuff that your body creates an antibody, an immune response that resembles rimonabant, that pharmaceutical blocker. So that's the sort of suspected mechanism. It might also be involved if you're using it so much you downregulate the receptors on the surface of your cells, or it might be contaminants or impurities within the cannabis product that you're using. And you look, and the hot water can be explained by what they call a cutaneous skin syndrome. The hot water would pull blood to the surface, away from your organs, away from your intestinal tract, those blood-containing cannabinoids, so there's no more of that binding occurring, and you have a relief from symptoms. And you'd think West Coast, you got Washington, Colorado, California, they got all that legal marijuana, you'd think that they'd have more case reports on the West Coast, but we actually have more here on the East Coast, where we have an unregulated market. Nothing's tested for purity and potency. You're always buying it from the street, where you get it from somebody who's got a whole bunch of it, and it's a terrible situation. We don't have this quality testing where we can find things like pesticides, toxins, and really know what the profile is that's helping people for certain illnesses. No regulation on sales, and there's no limited quantity you can buy. So this is really the problem. And if you want to learn more, come to theanswerpage.com. We have the content up there. We have many different modules on medical cannabis. I'm in talks with the Florida Medical Association to integrate this content down here in Florida as well, because doctors here need to learn this as well if we're going to have this in Florida, which we will eventually. And I just want a special thanks to Dr. Stephen Korn, who started the Answer Page, his wife, Dr. Meredith Fisher-Korn, who's the editor-in-chief, and an associate, Sunil Agarwal, who've helped me along through this. And check it out. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Questions?
So I have a question regarding the continuing education aspect. In general, not specific to the topic. Now, so different states have different boards and to regulate doctors, and they require, some of the boards, if I understand, require continuing education credits in order to be certified. Now, how is this enforced? I mean, can a state really enforce this and remove the license from the doctor and say, no, you cannot do this anymore? Or is it a kind of, slap in the hand, oh, you should do it next time so you can, so we won't, suspend your license? What's the enforcement level? It's my question here.
It's usually a board disciplinary type action, and I'm not sure if it would be a first offense or a second, third offense that would constitute removal of your medical license. But they're in talks right now with the Florida Senate is talking about adding a misdemeanor charge to physicians who suggest this or recommend this for patients where it's not it's not feasible. But generally it would be a board. I'm not sure if it would be a slap on the wrist or so, but generally it would be something that is disciplined by the Board of Medicine in that state. And in Massachusetts they require 2 hours of this. Florida is talking about requiring 8 hours of it. So it would be, you need to have the certification in order to discuss this and recommend it, write the certification, so then you could go to the store and get your certified purity and potency tested medical cannabis.
Now, follow up on that. Can this be done not only for the cannabis, because there's new knowledge for many other diseases, right? Many other conditions. So can this be extended to other, let's say something new comes up in the treatment of cancer. Some new drug was developed, XYZ, whatever. Can that also be required for these physicians in, in these other fields, not only limited to this topic?
The reason we have so much resistance is because they have it flawed. They have it listed as a Schedule 1 drug with no medical benefit. It's more restrictive than methamphetamines and heroin. It's on the same. It's more restrictive than cocaine, and so it's basically you wouldn't have to go through all these regulatory hoops if you had like another plant medicine. But it is extended. They do education on cancer, multiple sclerosis. There's different units discussing different specialties that it could be beneficial for. And even the National Cancer Institutes, you can go on cancer.gov, and it has listed on the PDQ for physicians. It says that it can be recommended by integrative oncologists not only for the treatment of palliative effects like helping people with appetite and nausea, but there also may be a direct anti-tumor effect that's been studied in mice and petri dishes, and so that's the new research coming out, and they're trying to broaden the scope. So as the research comes out, physicians would be able to recommend it for any specific illness it might be covered under literature for.
You mentioned about marijuana 2,700 years ago. It's in the Bible. It says herb is good for man, so it's actually in the Bible.
That was parsley.
No, herb is good for man. Seriously. So I don't get a chance to do a lot of research. Did you go to either one of your figures, because I want to talk a little bit about this. You mentioned the cannabidiol, right?
Yes. Well, the
cannabidiol does not bind to the CB1 or the CB2 receptor. Instead, it binds to a non-cannabinoid receptor, that's the PPAR gamma, and that allows for the control of cell division. And what we've seen by studying is that this cannabidiol can also be used to treat cancer because it can inhibit the expression of a protein called ID1 that would be involved in the genesis of cancer. So that's the benefit of the non, and it doesn't get you high. It's not THC. It's a derivative of that, but it doesn't bind to CB1 or CB2. And you mentioned about your brother, and I'm just gonna have to say this. He must have been talking a lot, but I think that he might have been down-regulating the CB1 receptor, or maybe even the CB2, because it sounds like when you smoke marijuana, it usually goes to the CB1 to control mood receptor, which is like say in the central nervous system, but you also have the immune part. So it might have been going to the CB1, and maybe he was generating antibodies, or he was down regulating the receptor, which is unusual because usually the receptors work by, if you put in more of the ligand, it's gonna make more of the receptor. But maybe in his body that was, and you say it's rare. I don't smoke marijuana, but my trip is gonna be to Denver soon.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the third thing is, you mentioned about treating cancer. I mentioned about the cannabidiol, but THC itself, so marijuana. If you go to a club, and I think since I don't go to a club and I'm not 25 years old, a lot of people use ecstasy in conjunction with marijuana. And basically what we've seen is that marijuana can offset all of the negative aspects of ecstasy. So not only does it have a benefit for cancer, but also for just the recreational drug use. Because they have, like, we know that ecstasy can cause hyperlocomotion. THC offsets that. It causes hyperthermal increase in the body temperature by activating the hippocampus. It offsets that. So everything that ecstasy does, THC seems to relieve that. And it does so by involving antioxidants. It's some good antioxidants. So I think with cancer in general, and also with the recreational drug use, it has its benefits. So I think this is an interesting thing. I think that doctors, so I don't want to just talk about marijuana, but every drug that we have almost has a receptor. So if we say, oh, he's on heroin, there's a receptor. If he's on cocaine, we know how cocaine can be involved in the dopamine release. So everything is at the molecular level. And so the use of endogenous, like you said about the anandamide, which I had read about also, it just proves that somehow there was a reason for all of these receptors is to involve our mood and our stability. So maybe herb is good for me.
You know, in terms of CBD, they're oil compounds, so it's much different than many of the pharmaceuticals we see because it's able to enter the tissue and be absorbed into the cell membrane where it activates tissues. And like the CBD, it's an antioxidant, it's also an anti-inflammatory. So if you're able to get that into the brain, many times like something like Alzheimer's could be involved with inflammation in the brain. So if we're able to introduce a compound that has anti-inflammatory effects systemically, whether you're rubbing it on a lotion on your skin, or you're eating it in a food, or you're smoking it, ingesting it through your lungs and absorbing it that way, it's this essential oil that has anti-inflammatory, protecting you from free radicals while turning you into one, is going to basically is going to be have a beneficial effect, generally speaking. Like any other plant medicine, even coffee has antioxidants you get in your morning cup every day. It's just things plants do. They donate electrons, protect us from free radicals, and so that's why you should get a variety of different plants and herbs in your diet.
All right, so we have to move forward, but thank you very much.